Karen pushed my little sister in a pool. Didn't know my dad's a judge. I still remember the scorching sun reflecting off the pavement as my father guided us into the local public pool that morning, with my little sister, Lily, practically bouncing on her toes in gleeful anticipation of a day filled with splashes and laughter. Despite the early hour, the air was already warm enough to make the shimmering blue water look especially inviting, and I could almost taste the chlorine drifting through the humid breeze. My father, who had carried a well-worn novel under his arm, planned to observe us from a shaded lounge chair while he read, though I knew his keen eyes would never stray too far from Lily's beaming face. As a teen girl who cherished these precious summer outings, I felt an almost protective urge to keep Lily safe in every sense, particularly because she was only just discovering how to float without gripping my arm. Nevertheless, her unbridled excitement convinced me that nothing would go wrong today, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe it. We found a couple of free lounge chairs close to the shallow end, spreading out our bright towels and setting down a small cooler stocked with cold drinks and simple snacks. Lily, still in the midst of learning her basic swimming skills, practically dragged me to the water's edge, her neon-pink floaties bobbing at her upper arms. While I knelt to test the water temperature, she attempted an exaggerated tiptoe maneuver, giggling at the refreshing sensation around her ankles. Our father ambled over, smiling at her eagerness as he reminded us to stay where the lifeguard could see us, though I suspected he would keep glancing up from his book every few seconds anyway. The morning light cast glimmering patterns across the surface, creating an irresistible invitation to cool off in the pool's gentle embrace. I took Lily's hand in my own, guiding her carefully down the steps, and soon she was squealing with delight, absolutely certain that this was the best day ever. Even at that hour, other families were beginning to arrive, although the pool had not yet reached its usual weekend capacity, which suited us perfectly. A few kids splashed in unison near the center, and I recognized one of them from school, but I decided not to wave, preferring to focus on Lily's progress as she practiced her cautious kicks. She concentrated so earnestly that her brows furrowed, and every time her arms propelled her forward, she let out a triumphant gasp, as though conquering the open ocean instead of a community pool. The sunlight dancing across the water's surface lent a sense of magic to the ordinary setting, and I felt a wave of sibling pride whenever Lily called out to me, urging me to watch her carefully. Our father watched from his chair, occasionally offering advice in his calm, measured tone, which seemed to give Lily more confidence with each gentle nod. In that peaceful moment, I believed everything would remain as flawless as it seemed. However, as time passed, I began to sense a subtle tension creeping into the otherwise pleasant atmosphere, because I noticed a woman seated not far from us, sighing heavily and occasionally shooting disapproving glances in our direction. She had arrived after we did, positioning herself beneath a large umbrella that cast a broad patch of shade across the deck, and she seemed to regard every excited squeal from the children nearby as a personal affront. Her posture radiated annoyance, and I could not help feeling unsettled by the way her gaze seemed to flick toward Lily with unmistakable hostility. At first, I dismissed it as a simple case of someone being grumpy about the echoes of laughter, but her continuous fidgeting, accompanied by dramatic eye rolls, suggested something more profound. Every so often, she would stand, peer around, and mutter something under her breath, as though expecting an apology for our mere existence. Instinctively, I inched closer to Lily, unsure why this stranger's presence made me feel so uneasy. Lily, blissfully unaware of the tension, continued her playful antics by pretending to be a majestic sea creature gliding through underwater kingdoms, occasionally surfacing to exclaim that she had discovered hidden treasure or befriended a benevolent mermaid. Her joy was infectious, and I tried to maintain my smile, although I could not entirely shrug off the unsettling sensation of being watched. Whenever I glanced in the woman's direction, I saw her pursing her lips or adjusting her wide-brimmed sun hat in a show of exasperation. She seemed to grow more irritated whenever Lily squealed in delight, and I silently wondered if she might complain to the pool staff about the normal sounds of children having fun. My father, absorbed in his book, had not yet seemed to register the woman's hostility, and I decided not to mention it. Hopping it would amount to nothing. Still, the ominous feeling lingered like an unspoken promise that our perfect day might soon fracture. At one point, my father set his book aside and walked over to us, crouching near the pool's edge to compliment Lily on her ever-improving paddle. He offered a few pointers, softly reminding her to keep her chin above the surface and maintain steady, confident movements. His gentle reassurance dispelled a fraction of my unease, reminding me that our dad was, in many ways, the epitome of calm authority, both at home and in his professional life. If anyone dared to threaten us, I felt certain he would step in without hesitation, though I never imagined we would require his intervention in a seemingly safe environment like this. Little did I know that what began as a handful of cold glares would soon escalate into something far more dangerous, something that would reveal the lengths people go to when fueled by misguided anger. In that moment, though, I simply savored Lily's triumphant grin, unaware that our serene summer day was perched on the brink of an unforgettable confrontation. Despite my initial attempts to brush off the uneasy feeling caused by that woman's piercing gaze, I soon found it impossible to ignore her altogether, because her disapproving glances seemed to intensify with every cheerful squeal Lily made. I did my best to keep my sister entertained and confident in the shallow water, trying to preserve our bright, carefree atmosphere by making silly faces and starting little water-splashing games that made her laugh. Lily, for her part, was completely invested in imagining herself as a magical mermaid with elaborate underwater adventures and a host of friendly sea creatures, and whenever she managed a slightly more coordinated stroke, she would spin around to make sure I was watching, beaming from ear to ear as though she had just conquered the entire ocean. My father, seemingly oblivious to the tension, would occasionally glance in our direction, and I could see the gentle pride in his eyes. However, as much as I longed to keep the peace for Lily's sake, I couldn't shake the notion that the scowling woman was only biding her time before turning her irritation into something more concrete. There was a hardness in her eyes that suggested she held little tolerance for any disruption she deemed unacceptable, and I kept telling myself that perhaps she was just having a bad day and needed space, though the logic failed to assuage my growing dread. Eventually, as we continued to enjoy our game of mermaids and doggy paddles, I saw the woman slowly stand from her lounge chair and stride toward the pool's edge. She held her head high, adjusting her floppy sun hat with a dramatic flair that screamed for attention, and I braced myself for some sort of confrontation, praying that it would be nothing more than a curt remark about us keeping our voices down. Nevertheless, my mind started racing with all the possible ways I could respond if she indeed decided to engage us, and my heart pounded uneasily. She stopped just a few feet away from me, glaring at Lily, who was wholeheartedly unaware of this stranger's fixation on her, and then cleared her throat in a pointed manner. When that failed to elicit the immediate response she desired, she grunted in annoyance and demanded that my sister be quieter, because she was trying to relax and couldn't stand the constant screeching coming from this side of the pool. Her voice was stiff and dripping with contempt, lacking any semblance of empathy for a young child who was simply having fun in a public space. I quickly apologized out of politeness, though I felt no genuine remorse for letting my little sister enjoy her swim, and I quietly suggested that Lily keep her voice to a moderate volume, trying not to alarm her or break her spirit. Lily nodded, slightly confused but obedient, and resumed her playful movements in the water at a more hushed decibel, her small brow furrowing at the idea that she was bothering someone. For a short while, I believed that might be the end of our tense exchange, because the woman turned and stalked back to her chair, grabbing a magazine and flipping through it with exaggerated force. I seized the chance to breathe, encouraging Lily and praising her for being considerate, even though I knew that, in truth, she had done nothing wrong. Our father glanced over, appearing a bit puzzled about why Lily had suddenly toned down her excited chatter, and I gave him a reassuring nod that signaled nothing required immediate attention, though I couldn't help feeling we were teetering on the edge of further trouble. The pool itself still bustled with other families enjoying the sunshine, children playing games of Marco Polo, parents exchanging stories about summer barbecues, teenagers lazing about with headphones plugged in. But I felt like a spotlight had pinned us in this awkward dynamic with a stranger who clearly resented any disruption to her notion of tranquility. Occasionally, I would spot her shifting her gaze from behind the glossy pages of her reading material, her eyes narrowing as though Lily's subdued laughter alone was an affront to her senses, and I caught myself tensing up in anticipation of another outburst. I could tell that the uneasy atmosphere was starting to seep into Lily's demeanor as well, because she grew quieter than usual, uncertain if every splash she made would provoke our angry observer again. Instead of freely experimenting with her strokes, she began glancing nervously at me, and her once joyful giggles became more self-conscious. Eventually, she whispered that she wanted to try the shallow deep transition area, a spot of the pool where the floor gradually sloped so that stronger swimmers could venture deeper without a sudden drop-off. But it was also a place where Lily could almost stand in certain parts if she remained close enough to the slope. My father had been guiding her attempts in that area on previous visits, and she was eager to prove her growing courage. Given that my father was only a few steps away, I agreed, as it still wasn't truly the deep end, and I knew Lily wanted to challenge herself under my watchful supervision. We slowly made our way over, staying along the edges where the water depth gently increased. I kept a hand near Lily's floaties, and she grinned each time her feet lost touch with the floor for a moment, proud that she was swimming for real, even if only for a couple of seconds at a time. All the while, I remained very much aware of the tension behind us, because I could feel the woman's eyes practically drilling into my back. However, a part of me believed that if we just minded our own business and allowed her to stew in her apparent discontent, we might avoid any further conflict, so I tried to focus on Lily's small achievements. She managed a half-doggy paddle, half-mermaid kick that propelled her forward a foot or so, and she surfaced beaming, proclaiming that she felt like a real swimmer. I laughed in support, ruffling her hair, and that caused her to blush with pleasure, proud that her big sister deemed her efforts impressive. My father, who had been observing from his lounge chair once more, chimed in with a congratulatory gesture, and Lily waved back, feeling confident enough to ask if she could do it again. I was just about to encourage her when I noticed, from the corner of my eye, that the woman was gathering her belongings and angrily stomping in our direction once more, her lips set in a determined line that told me our earlier encounter wasn't over. With stiff shoulders, I turned to face her, fully expecting an accusation that Lily was still making too much noise or that we were monopolizing the shallow end. But what I saw instead was a flash of frustration that bordered on hostility. She let out a theatrical sigh, rolling her eyes as though forced to address the most insufferable nuisance imaginable, and asked why we insisted on being in the public pool if my sister couldn't even swim properly. The words landed with a stinging directness, and I felt my face growing hot at her unnecessary cruelty, but her contempt didn't end there. She proceeded to claim that Lily was dangerous for other swimmers, flailing around in a way that could knock someone else off balance or ruin someone's peaceful relaxation. Her voice carried across the water, drawing the attention of a couple of nearby parents, who exchanged confused looks as they witnessed the astonishing audacity behind the woman's remarks. Lily, faced with this sudden onslaught, shrank back behind me, her lower lip trembling, though she tried her best to keep a brave face. I found myself at a loss for words momentarily, torn between a desire to stand up for my sister's right to learn and the urge to keep the peace by not inflaming the situation further. Still, my protective instincts flared, and I swallowed the lump in my throat before gently explaining that Lily had every right to practice swimming in a section designed for beginners, and that I was supervising her carefully. I also reminded her that there were lifeguards on duty who had not expressed any concerns, so perhaps the issue was less about Lily's swimming and more about the woman's own intolerance. That statement caused the woman's face to contort in barely restrained anger, and she scoffed, shaking her head as though we were the epitome of youthful insolence. Her gaze flicked from me to Lily, who clung to my arm, uncertain whether she had done something wrong, and I could see that my attempts at a calm explanation had only fanned the flames of the woman's irritation. She barked at us to stay in the shallowest part, far from her vantage point, unless we wanted to ruin someone else's day too, then stomped away with a final sneer. At that moment my father, who had taken notice of the tension in earnest, rose from his seat, wearing an expression that hinted he might intervene if the confrontation escalated further. But the woman retreated to her corner of the pool area and sat down with a huff before he could reach us. I exhaled shakily, trying to regain some composure, and assured Lily that she hadn't done anything wrong. Her eyes were downcast, and she mumbled something about not wanting to upset people, which broke my heart because her only goal was to have fun and learn a valuable skill. My dad approached, resting a reassuring hand on my shoulder, and asked if everything was all right. I gave him a brief account of the confrontation, careful not to alarm Lily, and he nodded with a gravely calm demeanor, reminding me that no one had the right to bully us out of using a public amenity. However, as much as I wanted to put the incident behind us, I couldn't completely shake the sense of foreboding that lingered in the back of my mind, warning me that this woman's hostility wouldn't simply evaporate if she decided Lily was still a nuisance. The tension, once a mere undercurrent in an otherwise cheerful day, had begun to bubble to the surface, threatening to overshadow the innocent joy we had come here to experience, and I found myself quietly hoping that we would somehow make it through the rest of our outing without further incidents. The rest of the morning passed in a fragile state of uneasy truce, where Lily and I tried to focus on improving her swimming technique without drawing further attention, while my father occasionally glanced toward the irritable woman, as though he was ready to stand up the moment she made another move. During that tense interim, Lily managed to complete a few hesitant laps across the shallow section, assisted by her floaties, and every time she emerged with a bright smile, proud of her small progress, I felt a surge of affection for her unflagging determination. Even though a cloud of anxiety hung over me, I could see that she hadn't allowed the stranger's cutting words to diminish her enjoyment entirely, which was a testament to Lily's innate resilience and her unwavering faith in the goodness of people. At times, she would cast fleeting, anxious glances toward the far corner where the woman sat fuming beneath her hat, but I tried to redirect Lily's focus, encouraging her to stay by my side and reminding her that she was doing incredibly well for someone who had only just begun to feel comfortable in water deeper than her waist. Whenever my dad noticed Lily growing uneasy, he would stand and wave encouragingly, letting her know that he was present and keeping a careful eye on her progress. Perhaps the woman sensed that my father was observing her, because for a stretch of time, she remained seated, silently flipping through her magazine, her expression occasionally stiffening with annoyance if Lily's voice carried her joy across the pool. I found a small measure of relief in the notion that perhaps she had decided to let it go and simply endure our presence, even though it was abundantly clear she took no pleasure in hearing or seeing children at play. The morning sunshine intensified, making the concrete around the pool grow uncomfortably hot, so occasionally Lily and I would climb out to reapply sunscreen and take a drink of cold water from our cooler before cautiously returning to the water's edge. We kept as much distance as possible between ourselves and the woman, opting to remain near the slope that Lily favored, and with each mini break, my sister's confidence seemed to build, fueled by the idea that she was gradually mastering the art of keeping herself afloat without needing to grip my arm every second. She giggled more often now, though still at a slightly subdued volume, as though attempting to avoid summoning any further complaints from the person who had already made it clear she disapproved of Lily's presence. It was nearing midday when the inevitable confrontation reached its boiling point. Lily, who had grown tired but insisted on one more practice swim before we took our lunch break, was standing in about chest-high water with me within arm's reach, and my dad was still carefully watching from his chair. I remember noticing that the woman had again risen from her seat, her posture bristling with impatience as she glared at a cluster of children who happened to be splashing near her side of the pool. Although Lily and I were not the immediate source of that racket, I saw her expression tighten with each shriek of delight, and it seemed that she wanted someone, anyone, to blame for her discomfort. Still, I was unprepared for the sudden way she stormed around the pool, muttering under her breath and brushing past people without so much as an "excuse me." My father, catching sight of her determined stride, stood up straight, setting his book aside. I felt my heart thump uncomfortably in my chest, the same premonition I'd been battling all day lurching to the forefront of my consciousness. Then, with abrupt swiftness, she made a beeline toward us. Her face was contorted in anger, the veins in her neck standing out in sharp relief as though any shred of patience had snapped. She called out, her voice carrying venomous accusations about inconsiderate children and negligent parents, referencing Lily directly by barking that the little brat should be taught some manners or forcibly removed. I gritted my teeth, trying to maintain composure, but my hands trembled under the water's surface. My father, still a short distance away but clearly alarmed by her aggressive tone, stepped forward, opening his mouth to intervene. However, the woman moved too quickly, and my father couldn't reach us in time. One moment Lily was standing there, timidly catching her breath from her latest doggy paddle attempt, and the next, the woman was right behind her, glaring down at her floaties with open disgust. Before I could even process what was happening, she placed both hands firmly on Lily's shoulders and shoved her forward with alarming force. The shock of it propelled Lily away from the safety of the shallow slope, sending her headlong into the deeper section she wasn't yet prepared to handle. For a split second, I was paralyzed by the horror of seeing my sister's eyes go wide as she realized she was past the point where her feet could touch the bottom. Her floaties, while helpful in shallower water, weren't enough to keep her comfortably afloat in an area designed for swimmers who could manage themselves without assistance. She thrashed and sputtered, her little arms desperately trying to push herself above the surface, and I shouted her name with such panic that several people nearby turned their heads in alarm. Meanwhile, the woman simply stood there, a sneer twisting her features as though Lily's helpless flailing amused her. The seconds stretched in my mind as I lunged forward, my legs kicking frantically to reach Lily, who bobbed under the surface, resurfaced with a gasp, and then went under again. In the background, I could hear my father's voice slicing through the air, deeper and louder than I'd ever heard, shouting at the woman, and then imploring the lifeguard to help. But my entire world narrowed to the singular task of getting to my sister before she swallowed too much water. I swam in a frenzied burst, my arms churning, and managed to grab hold of Lily's wrist, pulling her up against my chest while she coughed, trembled, and clung to me with desperate force. Even as I struggled to keep us both afloat, I could feel Lily's heartbeat pounding in her chest, and when I looked into her face, her eyes brimmed with utter terror, tears mingling with the chlorinated water dripping from her cheeks. Gasping for breath, I kicked toward the side, one arm locked around Lily's trembling form until we finally reached the pool's edge. My father was already there, leaning over, and between his strength and my strained effort, we lifted Lily out of the water. She collapsed in his arms, coughing and shuddering, while he soothed her with calm words, even though I could sense the rage boiling behind his usual composure. He pressed gentle hands to Lily's face, checking her quickly for signs of serious injury, and she sobbed that she had been so scared that she couldn't breathe, that she thought no one was going to catch her. My father's features hardened at those words, and when he looked up, his expression fell upon the woman who still stood near the water, watching us with that same scornful sneer. In that instant, I thought my father might lunge at her, and for a split second I wouldn't have blamed him, because something primal in me wanted her to feel a fraction of the panic she had so carelessly inflicted on Lily. But instead, he took a stabilizing breath, raising his arm in a clear signal to the nearest lifeguard, who came rushing over, eyes wide at the sight of Lily's frightened tears and my father's uncharacteristic look of cold, righteous fury. While other pool patrons watched in shock, the lifeguard demanded to know what had happened, and my father, speaking with clipped precision, explained how the woman had deliberately shoved his youngest child into water she couldn't handle, leading to a clear case of endangerment. The woman, evidently lacking any remorse, rolled her eyes and retorted that Lily should have known better than to wander near the deeper end, as though a child's inexperience and trust were crimes deserving punishment. Murmurs of disbelief rippled among the onlookers, and a few parents rushed over to see if Lily was okay, offering towels or comforting words, while the lifeguard shook his head, struggling to reconcile the sheer brazenness of the act with the usual squabbles he was accustomed to settling at the pool. I held onto Lily's hand, rubbing slow circles on her back in an attempt to soothe her, all the while feeling my own adrenaline surge as I tried to process the fact that someone would so casually push a child into danger. My father, rigid with anger but maintaining an eerie calm, directed the lifeguard to contact the pool manager immediately. Meanwhile, the woman actually scoffed, insisting that everyone was overreacting and that she had only given Lily a nudge, which was apparently her deranged version of a justification. I looked at her in utter disbelief, unable to comprehend how anyone could show such flagrant disregard for a terrified child, and I felt my chest tighten with an urge to scream at her. But once again, I took my cues from my father, who held Lily protectively and signaled me to remain calm, promising me with his steady gaze that there would be consequences for what this woman had done. The cluster of gawkers who had gathered seemed equally astonished, and a few bold voices demanded the woman apologize, though she simply folded her arms and shot back with a smug remark about how, if Lily didn't know how to swim, she had no place being in a public pool. It was a statement that stirred an undercurrent of muttering among nearby parents, many of whom recognized that a community pool was precisely where children learned and honed their swimming skills under the supervision of guardians and lifeguards, not a private retreat reserved for elite swimmers. The manager arrived in a hurry, a mixture of concern and confusion evident on his face as he spotted Lily's tear-streaked cheeks and the unconcealed fury radiating from my father. The lifeguard relayed the incident, describing how this woman had forcefully shoved a young child into the deeper section, fully aware the child could not swim independently, and continued to show zero remorse for nearly causing a drowning. My father's succinct explanation only reinforced the severity of the accusation, and the manager's expression turned stony. In that moment, I noticed the woman's confidence falter just a fraction, as though it was dawning on her that she might not be able to bully her way out of the consequences. Meanwhile, Lily clung to my father's shirt, a lingering cough rattling in her chest whenever she tried to breathe deeply. My heart ached at the sight, and I couldn't help cursing myself for not intervening a split second sooner, though logically, I knew there had been no way to predict such sudden, vicious behavior from a stranger at what was supposed to be a friendly community space. The manager's sharp voice cut through the thick tension as he informed the woman that her behavior was absolutely unacceptable and that he would be notifying the proper authorities to document the incident. Rather than apologize or show any comprehension of the seriousness, she merely glowered, her eyes flicking between the lifeguard, the manager, and my father, who still held Lily close, trying to quell her trembling with quiet reassurances. As the possibility of real repercussions became clearer, the woman's sneer twisted into a defensive snarl, and I could see her grappling with the sudden realization that she had targeted the wrong family. Because not only did my father project a calm resolve that hinted at powerful connections, he was also not the type to walk away from a serious grievance. The air around us felt electric, brimming with the shock and outrage of onlookers who couldn't believe what they had just witnessed, and I silently vowed that I would do whatever it took to protect Lily from further harm, knowing that my father would soon show this woman the true weight of her actions. I found myself trembling with a potent mixture of outrage, relief, and lingering fear as the manager led the woman away from the immediate cluster of shocked onlookers, giving Lily a chance to catch her breath without those cold, mocking eyes bearing down on her. My father, still clutching Lily against his chest, spoke in low, reassuring tones, telling her that she was safe now and that he would ensure nobody ever dared to treat her so cruelly again. I hovered by their side, watching Lily's tears slip down her cheeks and feeling my own sense of guilt nibbling at me, because I kept replaying that horrifying moment. Those few seconds when the woman's push had sent Lily into a watery panic that could have ended in tragedy. My father, who usually exuded calm, had an unmistakable hardness in his expression, a quiet fury that signaled that events would not simply resolve with the woman's removal from the premises. Indeed, I could feel that a bigger confrontation was imminent, one in which my father would leverage every resource at his disposal to see that justice was served. Within minutes, we spotted a police officer entering the pool area, alerted no doubt by either the manager or another staff member. The sight of an officer in uniform caused a ripple of murmurs among the people who were still watching, and I sensed the communal disapproval directed at the woman. Several parents were scowling at her, exclaiming in hushed or not-so-hushed voices that they couldn't believe someone would be so callous as to shove a little girl into the deep end of a pool. While some of them whispered speculation about possible motivations, or the odds that the woman had some kind of personal grudge against children, others simply gaped in bewilderment, struggling to come to terms with the idea that, in a public space meant for family fun, such a malicious act could occur without any provocation. Meanwhile, the police officer, a tall figure with an air of calm authority, listened intently to the pool manager's explanation before walking over to my father to get his statement. I watched as my father gently set Lily down on a nearby lounge chair, smoothing back her damp hair and urging her to rest for a moment. Then, with a steady breath, he turned and explained precisely what had transpired, his voice bearing the same measured tone he usually employed when dissecting a serious matter, though there was an undercurrent of righteous anger that colored every word. The officer scribbled notes while my father recounted how the woman had been complaining about children making noise, and then, with no warning, shoved Lily into water far beyond her ability. He emphasized that Lily had almost drowned as a result, and that, even after the incident, the woman showed not an ounce of remorse. A few bystanders chimed in, confirming that they too had seen the push and had been appalled by the woman's laughter, or at least her smug smirk, when Lily was thrashing in the water. I heard each account building on the last, weaving a narrative of deliberate harm that could not easily be chalked up to a misunderstanding or a simple accident. The officer's gaze flickered with concern as he absorbed these testimonies, and when he approached the woman, his posture was distinctly more rigid, his tone unequivocally stern. At first, she tried to feign indifference, shrugging as though the entire matter was beneath her. But as the questioning continued, she became combative, insisting that Lily should have stayed out of the way, and that she, the woman, was the real victim of unruly children and inattentive parents. This shameless attempt to rewrite the narrative sent a fresh wave of fury coursing through me, because the gall it took to push a child into deep water, and then pretend to be the aggrieved party was almost too staggering to accept. My father, tightening his jaw, intervened quietly, speaking to the officer just loud enough for the woman to overhear that he had every intention of pressing charges for child endangerment. The policeman nodded slowly, indicating that there was sufficient evidence to pursue a formal complaint, especially with multiple witnesses willing to cooperate. I saw the woman's cheeks flush slightly at the mention of child endangerment, as if reality was finally piercing her sense of impunity. Yet even then, she tried to bluster her way out of it, sneering that if my father thought he could intimidate her, he had another thing coming. That was the moment I saw a subtle but significant change in my father's demeanor. He stepped forward, his voice controlled but unwavering, and told her in no uncertain terms that not only would he see this through legally, but he was, in fact, a judge within the county's jurisdiction. Any illusion she clung to about trivializing the incident or escaping accountability began to crumble under the weight of that revelation. Her eyes widened, and she faltered for a moment, trying to stammer out a retort about how she doubted he had any real authority, but the look on his face was resolute enough to silence her protests. While the uniformed officer observed this exchange, I caught a flicker of comprehension in his eyes, as though he recognized my father's name or had at least heard about him in professional circles. It was a jarring contrast to see my father, the man who typically saved his unwavering authority for the courtroom, standing by the side of a pool in casual summer attire, and yet emanating a gravitas that even the most belligerent of adversaries could not ignore. The woman licked her lips nervously, fumbling over her words, and tried a final, desperate approach by accusing my father of using his position to threaten her, claiming it was unfair. My father maintained his composure, calmly reiterating that whether he was a judge or not, her actions constituted a serious crime. He made it clear that no one, regardless of their professional standing, would allow a child to be shoved into deep water without consequence. The onlookers nodded in agreement, and the policeman, clearing his throat, informed the woman that she would need to cooperate in filing a formal statement and that she might be taken into custody if she continued resisting. Glaring at the officer, she begrudgingly complied, all the while shooting venomous looks in our direction. Meanwhile, Lily, having calmed down somewhat, was now perched on the lounge chair, wrapped in a soft towel, her breathing gradually returning to normal. She was still shaken by the close call, but she stared with wide, curious eyes at the unfolding scene, trying to process how it had escalated so quickly. I kneeled beside her, offering gentle rubs on her shoulders and whispering that everything was going to be okay. Our father, as if sensing Lily's renewed vulnerability, excused himself from the direct confrontation and came to her side, brushing a hand gently over her damp hair. With soft reassurance, he reminded her that he was there to protect her and that no one who endangered her would walk away unscathed. Lily nodded faintly, some measure of security returning to her eyes as she clung to that promise. In the background, the policeman began to explain that a citation would be issued for child endangerment, and the pool manager, who was hovering anxiously by, insisted the woman would be banned permanently from the premises. At first, the woman blanched, her outrage rolling off her in furious waves as she declared that she had paid her membership fees, that she had a right to be there, and that they couldn't possibly ban her. The manager, who had apparently reached the end of his patience, retorted that no facility worth its salt would allow someone who had nearly drowned a child to keep coming back. This further inflamed her temper, and I worried she might lash out physically again, but the policeman stepped in, cautioning her that any further disturbance would result in immediate arrest. The undercurrents of tension that had simmered all day were now on full display, culminating in a standoff that, for the briefest moment, felt surreal. The midday sun glaring down on the shimmering pool, families clustered at a distance, uncertain whether to resume their carefree splashing or remain transfixed by the dramatic turn of events. Amid that uneasy tableau, my father maintained a solemn focus on Lily's welfare, refusing to engage further with the woman's attempts to claim she was the real victim. Slowly but surely, the momentum shifted toward resolution. The officer, after taking my father's statement and gathering more details from other witnesses, requested that the woman accompany him to the nearby station to finalize paperwork. She tried one more time to twist the scenario by accusing Lily of faking her difficulty swimming to garner sympathy, but the cold stares of the people around her, combined with the sheer absurdity of her claim, made her argument crumble. With no apparent escape from the consequences, she eventually fell into a sullen silence. As she was led away by the policeman, the pool manager double-checked Lily's condition, apologizing profusely for not intervening sooner and promising that the facility would fully cooperate with any legal steps we decided to take. My father thanked him curtly, his protective instincts still heightened, and after the woman was out of sight, he let out a long breath, as though finally releasing the tension that had coiled in his chest ever since Lily was pushed. It took some time for the crowd of bystanders to disperse, murmuring among themselves about the shocking incident they had just witnessed. A few parents approached Lily, patting her shoulder gently or offering supportive words, telling her she was very brave and that they were sorry she had been so frightened in a place that should have been safe for kids to enjoy. Lily smiled weakly, though tears still clung to her lashes, and each kind word seemed to bring back a little more color to her cheeks. My own adrenaline still pulsed through my veins, leaving me slightly unsteady on my feet, but I huddled close to Lily, brushing away her tears and praising her for staying calm when I swam to her rescue. My father, kneeling down to meet her eye level, reassured her once more that she was safe and that he would ensure this stranger faced the full extent of the law. I realized then how fortunate we were that my dad had both the knowledge and the steadfast willingness to pursue justice, because I couldn't imagine how differently the scenario might have ended if there had been no one to stand up for Lily's rights, or if we had been intimidated into letting the matter slide. Even so, as Lily's sobs subsided into slow sniffles and she dried her face on my father's shirt, I couldn't help feeling that there was still a thread of tension in the air, a quiet acknowledgement that this incident would leave its mark on Lily's memory for a long time, and that we would need to heal from the scare. Nonetheless, I took solace in the unwavering love and determination reflected in my father's gaze, and in the knowledge that the woman, the so-called Cairn, had just discovered, in the harshest possible way, that there are grave repercussions for endangering a defenseless child. I felt a fragile calm once the police escorted the woman away, her furious protests fading to hollow echoes. Though sunlight still danced on the pool, onlookers drifted back to their routines. Lily, tears streaking her face, clung to my father and me, her towel bunched in trembling hands. I told her no bully could steal her love for swimming, though I sensed fear flickering in her eyes. My father, voice firm, told Lily he would press charges. Child endangerment was serious, and he refused to let the woman walk free. Though Lily's voice shook, she asked if the woman might come back. My father shook his head, reminding her that the pool had banned her and that the police were involved. Lily nodded, relief softening her face. Other parents approached, offering sympathy. One handed Lily candy, another thanked my father for protecting kids. Their kindness reassured me that the woman's malice was an exception. The manager gave my father paperwork and promised security footage. He accepted it calmly, telling Lily she wouldn't need to relive the ordeal more than necessary. Although our day was shattered, Lily insisted on staying a little longer, refusing to let a stranger define her bond with water. She and I waded back into the shallow end. She cast nervous glances around, but her resolve held. Slowly, she steadied her breathing, and a tiny smile returned. My father stayed close, torn between giving her space and ensuring she felt safe. A lifeguard reassured Lily he was on watch, which eased her jitters. Soon Lily tired, so we helped her out and gathered our things. A few families offered kind words, and she managed a slight grin, buoyed by their warmth. When we left, she held my father's hand tightly, relieved we weren't fleeing in panic. We reached the car, shaken yet determined not to be defined by what happened. During the ride home, my father explained the next steps: a formal report, witness statements, and ensuring the woman faced real consequences. Lily, huddled in the back seat, seemed reassured by his steady resolve. By the time we arrived home, she was breathing more easily, though her eyes still shone with lingering worry. Inside, Lily disappeared briefly, returning with a half-finished drawing of fish and coral. She set it on the table, declaring that no one could steal her love of the water. My father's stern expression softened as he praised her bravery, then made another call to the authorities. I stayed with Lily, helping choose crayons, relieved to see her fear slip away into the bright swirl of color. Over the next days, rumors spread about the judge's daughter who nearly drowned at a community pool. Yet the consensus was clear: cruelty wouldn't go unpunished. My father gathered evidence for a strong case, speaking to witnesses and reviewing any footage that surfaced. Lily gradually regained her confidence at a friend's pool, flinching at splashes but forging ahead, determined not to let that woman's shove define her. My father watched with pride, astonished that such a nightmare had unfolded at a place meant for innocent fun. Eventually, Lily asked to return to the public pool. We agreed, ready to leave if she got anxious. Staff welcomed her warmly and a few swimmers waved in support. She managed a short lap in the shallow end, surfacing with a relieved laugh. My father clapped, pride shining in his eyes. As we left, Lily glanced back at the water, refusing to be ruled by fear. Outside, she thanked us for believing in her. We drove home under a calmer sky, feeling the ordeal lose its grip. Over dinner, my father mentioned the woman's fine, ban, and court date. Lily nodded, then taped her finished mermaid drawing to the fridge, announcing she felt ready to swim any time. That evening, she pored over books on underwater creatures, her eyes bright with possibilities. Though she still startled if someone moved too fast, I sensed real hope. My father told her justice would prevail, but her biggest victory was choosing joy over fear. She gripped his hand, and I felt our family's relief settle across the house. My father's determination went far beyond a typical parental reaction, and it comforted Lily to know he wasn't just angered. He understood the legal gravity of what had happened. In the evenings that followed, he made phone calls, exchanged emails with local authorities, and organized documents to ensure the evidence was airtight. I glimpsed his notes, detailing how statements and video footage would confirm Lily's story. Lily sometimes hovered by his desk, watching him type, quietly reassured that such dedication stood behind her. Whenever she grew anxious, my father paused to remind her she was safe, that justice was never just a word. Despite her worries, Lily found ways to celebrate her progress. She put up sea life posters in her room and wrote encouraging notes about never giving up. Sometimes, before bed, she'd ask me to sit with her so she could talk about the day that went so wrong, but we always ended on the memory of how I pulled her to safety, how Dad defended her, and how she wasn't alone. Even her nightmares, once filled with the terror of sinking, softened into images of tropical fish and sunlit reefs, as if she were reclaiming the water as a haven rather than a threat. The next afternoon, Lily set up our small inflatable pool in the backyard, easing herself in with floaties. Under the summer sun, she splashed at her own pace, reclaiming the fun stolen from her. I watched, tears in my eyes at her resilience. She seemed steadier, no longer haunted by the push that almost robbed her of her confidence. By summer's end, Lily was swimming almost every week, her sparkle shining brighter than ever. In the end, my father's refusal to tolerate wrongdoing meant the woman faced true consequences for endangering a child. More importantly, Lily's spirit remained unbroken. Though that push would remain a stark memory, it reminded us how fiercely love and protection could overcome cruelty. Lily would keep swimming, keep dreaming, and keep trusting the water, guided by a family who stood beside her, stronger than any bully's shove.